Joey Clark.
Welcome back to News and Views in the afternoon. I'm your host, Joey Clark. And, the question of whether or not Trump is really a unique threat to democracy was on my mind over the weekend because it truly, like I was telling Judge Knapp, it seems like all presidents have done awful things that abuse the democratic process and certainly abuse American liberty. And this is nothing new. All the way back in 1925, H.L. Mencken was musing on how, liberty and democracy are eternal enemies, and everyone knows it who has ever given any sober reflection of the matter. At least 95 Americans out of every 100 believe that this process, though, is honest and even laudable. It is practically impossible to convince them that there is anything evil in it. In other words, they cannot grasp the concept of liberty. And what's interesting in that Mencken piece from, again, 1925, is he's talking about how the government will manage speech, manage opinions, destroy people who don't have the correct opinion. So all this stuff we're now seeing, this misinformation infrastructure, heading into this election cycle, it's nothing new. It's been going on for 100 years with different means and methods. But the technology has grown leaps and bounds for the government to spy into your life, to destroy livelihoods if you're not carrying the official narrative, or worse, just to shut you up to where people don't even know you exist, especially online. But here's the hope. Again, this has been around for 100 years, but now we can see it. Maybe it's due to the graciousness of one billionaire named Elon Musk, who's invested all this money into Twitter, billions and billions that he probably won't get back, though I'd imagine down the road he might. So have hope. It's one thing to say, hey, the government's corrupt, the deep state's corrupt, this oligarchy or ruling class or managerial class, whatever you want to call these dopes, say they're corrupt, they're illegitimate, they shouldn't be doing what they're doing. But somehow, I think the American people need to wake up to this has been going on a long time. Now that we can see it, we need to deal with it. And, the problem, though, is there are some folks who I think are literally in love with democracy, in love with the idea. I think democracy, to some folks, has become the new God. And that clip or that quote I played or read to the judge, talking about how Christian nationalism means you believe your rights don't come from any earthly authority, but from our humanity and from God and nature's God. Seems like a pretty basic understanding of the American system as it was set up. When did we get rid of that, ma'am? But I think it was partly gotten rid of because people fell less in love with their liberties and their self-evident rights that no government has the right to take from you, and they started falling in love with the glories of our democracy. So love, as much as it may guide us to the zenith of life, can also blind us to the perilous paths we have chosen, and the perils of our democracy are more bountiful than that of any femme fatale. Accordingly, 2024 appears to be another election cycle destined to break hearts en masse. Will democracy scorn her professed champions like she did in 2016? Word is, she may be getting back together with an old flame, one President Donald J. Trump, and much to the dismay of democracy's professional lovers. Nothing seems able to extinguish that flame. No matter how much the American elite abused democracy to save democracy, the recent indictments of Trump being a naked display of the American oligarchy's abject lust for power, a democratic passion still burns for Trump. None of this is anything new. Ever since he descended that escalator, Trump has brought out the worst of the American elite's jealousy and hypocrisy. Not only have elites called him every evil name in the book, they continue to project every single one of their own past and future abuses of American liberty onto him. So let's go way back. Take, for instance, the laments of neoconservative Robert Kagan from 2016. In his piece, "This is How Fascism Comes to America," Kagan claims that the populism which Trump tapped into is what the founders most feared when they established the Democratic Republic. The popular passions unleashed the mobocracy. Kagan continues, conservatives have been warning for decades about government suffocating liberty, but here is the other threat to liberty that Alexis de Tocqueville and other ancient philosophers warned about, that the people in a democracy, excited, angry, and unconstrained, might run roughshod over even the institutions created to preserve their freedoms. I, too, take Tocqueville and other philosophers seriously when they warn us of democracy's perils. And quick aside, isn't it interesting how all our sources, say from ancient Athens, most of the people writing, the philosophers and thinkers, they were not impressed with Athenian democracy. They thought it was bonkers. They thought it was violent. They thought it was corrupt. In many ways, it was. And if you look at our so-called system today, whatever you want to call it, democracy or otherwise, yeah, I think old Athenian thinkers were warning us. But here's the deal. Where was Kagan or all these other guardians of democracy in the years leading up to Trump's rise? Do the supposed defenders of America's crumbling institutions really think the movements that backed Biden, Obama, George W. Bush, and Clinton were friendly to liberty and refrained from stoking the fears, vanities, ambitions, and insecurities of the people? Do they really believe the last 30 years of undeclared wars, unrestrained debt, unconstitutional mass surveillance, mass illegal migration, and a massive policy of inflation were healthy for American institutions? Does this brood of vipers not understand that democracy was a danger long before Trump ever found success in electoral politics, or that they, more than Trump, are the danger they warn against, and that they are more complicit in the bloody evisceration of America than any of Trump's accused crimes? Tragically, amid their moans for democracy, most Trump detractors still do not seem to grasp the concept of liberty, nor know themselves. Most damn Trump, not because of their differences with him or their love of liberty, but because they see an aspect of themselves in the Donald, the lust for power over others. In practice, like all forms of government, democracy has never lived up to its ideal. Mobocracy is not exclusive to our time or any particular political party. Playing on people's insecurities and fears of the other is not exclusive to America First. These are not flaws of a know-nothing populist reactionary movement, but features of democracy itself. As one of my favorites, Oscar Wilde, said of democracy all the way back in 1891, high hopes were once formed for democracy, but democracy means simply the bludgeoning of the people, by the people, for the people. It has been found out. I must say that it was high time, for all authority is quite degrading. It degrades those who exercise it and degrades those over whom it is exercised. When it is violently, grossly, and cruelly used, it produces a good effect by creating, or at any rate bringing out, the spirit of revolt and individualism that is to kill it. When it is used with a certain amount of kindness and accompanied by prizes and rewards, it is dreadfully demoralizing. Compared to Kagan's screed or so many of the screeching howlings of the detractors and enemies of Trump on cable news and around the corporate media, I think Wilde's assessment of democracy strikes me as a much more plausible exegesis, explanation of the Trump phenomenon. A spirit of revolt. A spirit of revolt after years of being violently, grossly, and cruelly used. That said, Trump's revolt is not quite in the spirit of individualism, at least not to my liking. But does that make him a unique threat to democracy? No. As Pat Buchanan explained back in 2016, the Trump revolt is animated by a resurgence of American nationalism. But nationalism will not kill our democracy by any means. American democracy has not only survived nationalist fervor throughout the nation's short history, it has often encouraged it at the expense of individual liberty. When given the choice, democracy will usually side with nationalism against liberty, if necessary. Yet there is hope that this current age of revolt and tumult has given us, in the spirit of 1776, another consequence the American elite did not intend. A growing population of Americans, more in love with their God-given liberties than any promise Trump, Biden, or our democracy could ever offer. We'll be right back.